Yeah, if you want to just show us something cool, we can do over exactly like you. It'd be awesome.
So I'm gonna play it's his last A part before Django's solo, and break down just a couple of the licks. That sound good?
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite tunes of and recordings that of Grappelli and Django. Uh, like most of the recordings, it swings super hard, but this one I feel like even more so. And what's really interesting is how Grappelli kind of uses pieces of the melody to launch into kind of an improvisation. This is something that would happen when you had a lot less time to record. Right nowadays, people take these long solos, but everything was a lot more condensed when Django and Grappelli recorded, especially their early stuff. So a lot of times, they would embellish the melody even more for to color it up and to make it more of their own and personalize it. But they would also use it as a vehicle for improvisation because maybe there wasn't like I don't even think Grappelli ends up taking another solo. It's just this little snippet, um, and so I think it's really interesting, and it becomes its own melody as well. It's kind of
Yeah.
amazing how all again like how he plays with the time and plays with the melody. So the melody's still in there, but he's doing all these really interesting things within that framework, right? So very violinistic things like right off the bat. This is something he loved to do, right? It's a blues lick. And he uses the open string too, so it's a very violinistic thing to do. And for the violinist, stay in third position and stretch up to that fourth finger instead of trying to shift up to it. Actually, just calibrate. This is a very Grappelli does all sorts of iterations of this exact lick. He might go right, and that's something he does in minor swing. So this type of phrase is actually pretty common for Grappelli. It's in his vocabulary. He loves it. But this is a different iteration of it. And I love how it lands on that B note. Really, really interesting. He has these violinistic licks, these bluesy phrases. He loves them, especially in certain key centers, right? This actually works very well over A minor, but it also works great over C major. So it gives a total different sound. The lick over A minor, right? C, right? It's very interesting how he does the same lick over C major and A minor, and they have a total different sound, but both bluesy in nature. So yeah, that phrase one more time. Then he does this lick. Very, very interesting, and I would say pretty progressive phrase for the time, right? That first phrase is very bluesy. You could hear Louis Armstrong play that exact phrase. But then this one is, it's hard to know exactly. I love getting into improvisers' heads and trying to figure out what they're thinking. And I think two things are on his mind, or I mean, he's in a flow state. He's not thinking while he's improvising. Great improvisers aren't really thinking a lot, but I think these types of phrases probably come out because of two reasons. One, they fit nicely on the hand as a violinist, right? You can kind of see it. There's a pattern here, right? This kind of 4-1, 4-1 just carries across the string. So you can see that it's a bit of a violinistic pattern. But sonically, if you, or sorry, not, more like harmonically, if you were to analyze it, you'd see that it's actually hitting a lot of the extensions because this is a D7 chord, right? So it's a dominant chord, and it's hitting all these interesting colors with the extensions by taking this pattern over each string. Each time it hits a different note that is part of the dominant extension. So whether he consciously did that or not, who knows? I think he probably liked the sound of it. Who doesn't like the sound of extended dominance? I mean, come on. So it's part the sound that he probably liked, but also very violinistic, and it's just a shape, and so it sits really nicely in this case. So that's something that you can do, violinists. You can explore these types of patterns in certain keys. Obviously, you're not going to do this in A flat, for example, because of the open string, right? Or the fact that you're using certain notes, right? But in D7, and we know how often D7 comes along in a lot of Django's repertoire, right? So you could have a very nice D7 lick by exploring this kind of 1-4-1-4 pattern, right? And then within the context of the melody, right? So I think he also has such a good rhythmic drive and a really cool way of going down and back up. So there's a lot to unpack there, but you can start to see that it's really a nice hand shape, as well as an interesting sonic choice. This next lick that he does is another kind of classic thing that Grappelli likes to do. So he ends up, again, right? I love that. That's I would say that this lick right here is probably a little more prominent. So the very, very classic bluesy, very swinging bluesy lick in C. Right, you could hear that in Grappelli's vocabulary in a lot of songs, but he's always flowing between these different types of licks and phrases so beautifully and so in the pocket and so swinging that you don't hear it, even though we're breaking it down as like lick, lick, lick. You don't hear it like that. Everything flows so well, and that's another thing that Grappelli was a genius at, was flowing seamlessly between these types of phrases. And then this last phrase is also very interesting, and actually this one's a little less characteristic. So he goes this kind of sweeping up major 7, and then he ends up ending on a harmonic. So as we know, Grappelli loved to play these natural harmonics, whether it's a open E, he loved that, but he also ends his solo with a harmonic. That's a very interesting thing just to think about. Like, ending your solo on a harmonic is a bold statement, right? It's like, hey, this is something I can do that a lot of others can't, because it's a very violinistic thing. So he has such a good balance of violinistic qualities with just pure musicality and swing and groove and flow.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, all of those are great. So for a student digging into those, specifically for the violinists, are there any very specific ways to break down the bowing for any of those patterns, or anything that students should be cognizant of?
Yeah. So the first thing to think about is just that typical swing bowing would be slurring on the off beats. Right, so it a lot of times, like if I were to just remind everybody. It's good to remind everybody that the swing bowing, right? It doesn't always follow this, but that's a good first guess at the bowing. When you learn a phrase, see if it fits in with that bowing where you're slurring. Like if it's an eighth note pattern, of course, you're kind of more focused on slurring the offbeats, and then in groups of two. But and if there's a rest and the phrase comes in an offbeat, then it would start on the slur. So that's something to think about. Right, there's an example. Or these kind of Grappelli does that kind of thing, but these types of phrases follow that bowing, which again is. And typically you put an accent on your slurs because that gives you the accent on the offbeats, and it gives you that kind of propelled bounce for the swing feel is accenting the slurs, but also doing them more on the offbeats. So you get that. That's a nice way to propel the swing.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much. We've got 3 great phrases to use out in the world, and also specifically on the song where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
Just before we go, do you have any hints for how to practice taking a little lick like this and putting it in a new context?
Absolutely. It's a big part of what I've done. I love learning solos or licks and phrases from great improvisers, getting them exactly as they do them, but then I love to mix them up and put them in different spots, because that's how we're gonna get the most out of learning these solos. Is not just, all right, well, I'm on the last A of this specific song, I can use this lick. Yeah, that is a great place to use it. You can't go wrong there. But how often is that gonna come up? Many jam sessions you're not playing that song. So what I do is I always like to break things off into smaller chunks, like I did here, and think about the chord motion. That just as a chord motion in a vacuum, right? So in this case, this kind of C major going up to D7. If your lick carries over that, we can name a whole slew of other songs that would work. But what you need to do is you need to think about kind of the getting into it and getting out of the lick. That's very specific, and I call those anchors. So the anchor points, whether they're the specific chord tones that will help you to understand how to get into them, and even more important is to kind of know the stopping points, right? Because if the lick is very specific to this chord progression and you're putting it somewhere else, and maybe you even rhythmically offset it and it doesn't go somewhere, things can go a little awry. But anytime you have a phrase that starts and ends within the chord, then those are even better because it's much easier to transfer them. But you do then sometimes get into the habit of kind of playing too much within a chord. And as I mentioned, my favorite thing about Grappelli is how he flows between the chords and connects the dots. But that's kind of another level up that you start to get as the more that you get familiar with these different licks. You can start to string them together in different ways. But yeah, I would say being able to break it down, knowing what the specific chords are, finding other songs that have a very similar chord motion, and just experimenting. And I also recommend taking a lick and seeing different ways that you can make it more your own, right? So if the lick is, see if you can change the rhythm. Right, see if you can change start the same but end differently. Maybe do something that starts different and ends the same as the lick. And that's something I practice a lot as well. Great way to build vocabulary, because jazz is a vocabulary, just like it's a language, so we have to build the vocabulary some way. So yeah, so those are some thoughts.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jay. We've got a lot to practice.
Great. Thanks for having me, and happy practicing, everybody.